In a small town on Florida's Panhandle, researchers are working to unravel a mystery. It involves the Dozier School for Boys, a notorious state-run institution that closed last year after more than a century. Former residents of the school say they were subjected to physical abuse, including severe beatings, and that some boys died as a result. State investigators examined the allegations last year, but declined to bring charges. Now, as NPR's Greg Allen reports, a team from the University of South Florida is using science to determine how many boys are buried there, and if possible, who they were.
They're called the White House Boys, a group of men, more than 300, who all have one thing in common. They were sent as boys to the state-run reform school in Marianna, Florida. Over the last decade, they joined together and began telling their stories of abuse and terrible beatings administered in a small building on the school's grounds, a building known as the White House.
You didn't know when it was coming. These were not spankings. These were beatings, brutal beatings.
Jerry Cooper is 67 now. He was 16 years old in 1961 when he was sent to what at the time was called the Florida School for Boys. He'd been running away from home and hitchhiking when he was picked up by an AWOL Marine driving a stolen car. A county judge charged him with car theft and sent him to the school. Some of the kids, like him, were charged with crimes. Cooper says others were there for running away from home or because they didn't have families.
We had many boys that was there for smoking in school, that were incorrigible. We weren't bad kids. We might have needed help in some respect, but that wasn't the place to find it, I'll tell you that right now.
Over the years, the Dozier School for Boys had several names. It opened in 1900 as the Florida State Reform School on 1,400 acres west of Tallahassee. Throughout its history, the school was known for its harsh conditions and brutal treatment. Over the years, a succession of reports and commissions called for reforms, but little changed. Cooper says he did his best to stay out of trouble, but after several weeks, he learned about the beatings firsthand. School staff got him out of bed at 2 a.m. one morning and took him to the White House, where he says they threw him on a bed, tied his feet, and began beating him with a leather strap.
The first blow lifted me 1.5 feet off that bed. And every time that strap would come down, you could hear the shuffle on the concrete because their shoes would slide. And, you could hear the bam.
Cooper passed out, but a boy in the next room later told him he counted 135 lashes. As incredible as it may sound, Cooper's story is not uncommon. There are dozens of White House boys with similar tales of beatings they received at the school in the 1950s and 60s. Several years ago, they began telling their stories in newspaper accounts and TV reports. Florida's former governor, Charlie Crist, ordered a state investigation into the allegations of abuse, torture, and deaths alleged at the school. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement interviewed the White House boys and former staff, but said it couldn't find enough evidence to support the allegations.
It all boils down to civil liability. They do not want anybody to be able to have factual evidence which would make them have to pay for these, what I consider to be crimes.
Roger Kaiser is a White House boy who helped form the group and who has written about his experiences at the school in the late 1950s. That state report also found no evidence indicating a staff member was responsible for any student deaths. Kaiser doesn't accept the state's conclusion.
No, there's just too many stories. I know of one that I personally saw die in the bathtub. That had been beaten half to death. I thought he had been mauled by the dogs because I thought he had ran. I never did find out the true story on that. There was the boy I saw that was dead that came out of the dryer. They put him in one of those large dryers.
State investigators say that using school records, they were able to identify 31 former students interred in the school cemetery. Records show 50 other boys also died at the school, with no indication of where most are buried. But in recent months, researchers from the University of South Florida have been spending time on the school grounds working to answer some of those questions.
All right, Matilda, let's go.
Like a farmer driving a high-tech plow, archaeologist Richard Estabrook pushes cart-mounted, ground-penetrating radar equipment over an area near the school's old cemetery. Instead of crops, Estabrook is plowing for data, information that identifies grave sites. He stops pushing for a moment to show what appears as wavy lines on his equipment screen. Signs he's found another grave.
This sort of disturbance as it goes down in there. See how these are all pretty much uniform going down?
Mm-hmm. Those lines.
And then all of a sudden, these lines across here, but all of a sudden you're starting to see this disturbance being very different.
Yes.
In this area. That's the classic indication of a grave shaft.
Forensic anthropologist Erin Kimmerly is leading the research at the Dozier School. She's an associate professor at the University of South Florida who became interested in the case after hearing the White House boys' stories. At the cemetery, just a clearing in the woods near the school, there are 31 crosses to mark those buried here. But in that section and in surrounding areas, Kimmerly has already identified 49 grave sites, and some, she says, may contain more than one person. For her, though, one question remains hard to answer. Why are there no records of where any of the boys who died at the school are buried?
Yet, when you look at the state hospital, the state prisons, the other state institutions at the time, there are very meticulous plot maps you can reference. Or if you're a family member today, you can say, where is, my great aunt buried, and they can show you exactly where. So, why that didn't happen here, I don't know, but that does stand out.
Kimmerly says identifying who's buried in the graves would require exhuming the bodies, something that can only be done if a family member of one of the deceased requests it. And that's where Glenn Varnado comes in. Varnado is a businessman from Central Florida whose uncle, Thomas, was sent to the school in the 1930s when he was 13 years old. A month later, he was dead. Varnado wants to exhume his uncle's remains and bring them back for burial in his family's graveyard. He's hoping Kimmerly's research will make that possible, but he believes the cemetery where she's been working isn't the only one on the school grounds. In the 1990s, Varnado visited the school, at that time still open, and asked to see his uncle's grave. He says a school staffer directed him not to the cemetery where Kimmerly is working, but to another location.
He took me to a second place and said, here's where we believe the 5 kids that died in the fire in 1914 are buried, and here's where good possibility, because of the timeline, that your uncle could be buried here.
Varnado isn't sure where that second cemetery is located. Kimmerly and many of the White House boys believe it's on a section of school grounds that's up for sale. That sale, though, is now on hold. Last week, Varnado went to court and secured a temporary injunction that halts it until his uncle's remains are found.
There's absolutely no question and no doubt that people that worked at that facility during the late 80s and early 90s knew then and know now that there are other places on the grounds of that school where children are buried.
After blocking them for months, the state has now agreed to allow Kimmerly and her team access to the rest of the school grounds. The White House boys believe Kimmerly's work will help uncover the truth about what happened at the school. Eventually, they hope to receive an apology and compensation from the state of Florida for the abuse they suffered there. Greg Allen, NPR News, Miami.
This is NPR.
You just get a funny feeling every time you come back here.
The search for answers at a former school for boys. Now at 6, the investigation inside this quiet Florida town where people kept quiet about the deaths of dozens of boys. Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Wendy Ryan.
And I'm Brendan McLaughlin. Families who have been waiting decades may soon get the answers they demand. The Dozier School for Boys in Florida's Panhandle is days away from being designated a massive crime scene. Dozier was shuttered 2 years ago after allegations of serial abuse and murder. Today, USF researchers and Senator Bill Nelson toured the grounds, and our Carson Chambers was invited to join them.
The north that you see all along, into the woods, this is all was cleared as we did the work.
We got our first look inside the now defunct Dozier School for Boys in Marianna, Florida, where stories of severe beatings, even missing boys, still haunt the tiny panhandle town.
We were uncovering, what was clearly grave shafts.
It may also be the last time our cameras are allowed here because in just days, the state-owned property will likely be declared a crime scene.
And if the court will give the order to exhume the bodies, have them examined, and to determine if there were crimes committed.
Dr. Erin Kimmerly and her team of USF researchers have spent months here. Ground-penetrating radar reveals there are 50 unmarked graves, nearly 20 more than the state found.
We know the grave sites are all over here.
Now a court order sits on a judge's desk with a signature. He could set into motion a massive exhumation that'll require $200,000 in state funding. U.S. Senator Bill Nelson says there's also $3 million in federal funding to help identify an unknown number of bodies.
The Dozier School was shut down in 2011 after allegations of severe beatings and suspicious deaths. Now, we were invited inside the property today for the first time, and when you see the mattresses and the bunk beds and the pillows still on the ground, it gives you a sense of how alone these boys must have felt.
We also got our first look inside what's known as the White House. Adults who survived Dozier report being sexually assaulted and tortured inside these small cells. Their screams floating out through bars on the window. Now there's hope. Their voices, all these years later, will be heard. In Marianna, Florida, Carson Chambers, ABC Action News.
A story of horrors out of a reform school for boys in northern Florida. Several former students, now men in their 60s, attended the school decades ago and say its manicured gardens and winding paths hid a deep, dark secret.
It was beautiful, and it looked like driving onto any college campus in America.
Roger Kaiser was an orphan around 12 years old when he was sent to the Florida School for Boys at Marianna.
I thought nothing could be worse than the orphanage in Jacksonville, Florida, where I'd lived. But little did I know that I was jumping out of the fire into the frying pan.
He is still haunted by a building at the school called the White House, where he says students were beaten and abused.
This was a concrete and steel building. And when you walk in there, it is like a dungeon. They beat me so badly that when I came out of the White House and went to the main office, I was so bloody they couldn't tell who I was.
Now 63 years old, Kaiser formed a group called the White House Boys and revealed another hidden memory of the school's past, a cemetery.
At this hour, USF researchers just identifying the first remains found in dozens of unmarked graves at a now closed reform school. For years, we've been following claims of sexual abuse and torture swirling around the Dozier School for Boys. We want to get right out to our Carson Chambers, who's been on this story since the very beginning. Carson?
Well, this unbelievable announcement was just made in this room on USF's campus, and I want to show you a picture. I've actually stood in the very spot where this little missing boy's remains were found, and I actually have a picture here. This huge oak tree, we are told, grew over his unmarked grave. He was there for so long, unmarked but not forgotten.
I was totally dumbstruck. I couldn't believe it after 73 and a half years of fighting and looking and hoping and praying.
She made a sacred vow to her parents on their deathbeds to find her missing brother.
I would look till I died. Well, I'm not dead, but there was times I wondered if after this many years I was going to find him before I did, because Mother Nature has a way of getting you.
Ovell Crowell lost her older brother, George Owen, when he was just 14 years old. 73 and a half years later, his remains have been found.
I'm just beginning to believe it. I wake up sometimes at night and I think I've dreamed it, but then I said, no, this is true.
Owen was a ward of the state's now shuttered Dozier School for Boys when he died mysteriously in 1940. Buried on school property, no headstone, no death certificate, before her family could return his remains to Auburndale. Now USF scientists reveal it appears the child was buried in a hurry.
Rather than being laid out in a supine position, he was on his side and against the edge of the grave, and it was sort of unusual.
USF scientists excavated the remains of 55 boys at Dozier Cemetery, more than the state recorded. Turns out Owens was the first grave they worked on.
But I think now they're rest in peace. Yeah.
Crowell plans to bring her brother back to Auburndale, lay him to rest with their parents. All these years later, her promise kept.
Well, I'm going to put him at my mother's feet.
And with one blessing comes another.
We're learning new information today in the investigation of graves at the Dozier School for Boys in the Panhandle. Just moments ago, Senator Bill Nelson heard from USF anthropologists who exhumed nearly twice the number of bodies originally thought to be buried there. Our Cameron Polam joins us live from outside the federal courthouse now, where that meeting just wrapped up. Cameron?
We had a chance to see the first composite sketch of one of these boys, and I'll tell you what, when you see the youthful innocence in his face, you realize that there's still a family out there right now searching for answers. Now, USF researchers say they have been able to successfully DNA test 12 bodies taken from the school grounds. 7 have now been identified as African American. 5 results are still pending. Now, researchers have only combed through 5 acres of the sprawling 1,400-acre property, and the task has been tedious, to say the least. The list of names were displayed in the meeting today, showing there are just so many more who still remain a mystery. Officials said they have not been able to determine any type of death for the bodies excavated from the school Senator Nelson referred to as a torture chamber.
Jay, now at noon, a disturbing update from USF researchers. They tell us they have found more remains than expected at the now closed Dozier School for Boys in Florida's Panhandle. Our Carson Chambers is live at USF. She joins us now with the details. Good afternoon, Carson.
Good afternoon. Many of these unmarked graves where the children's remains were discovered also came along with artifacts, which USF shared with us today, and we'd like to share with you respectfully this afternoon. What you're looking at here on this table are actually casket nails that they have recovered in some of these unmarked graves. And then over to the right here, this is actually a stone marble. We are told it was found in the pocket of a very young boy. And then over to the right, this is a casket plaque. It reads, "At rest." But many of the families who are searching for their missing children do not believe that they are at rest. And of course, they are trying to repatriate those remains and bring them home to their family plots. Now, USF scientists excavated 55 people. That is 24 more than the official records show and 5 more than they expected to find. They have been working at the site since 2012 at the now defunct Dozier School for Boys, using ground penetrating radar, heavy equipment, hand tools.
It's a really cool building here behind us. Today we are back in the state of Florida. We are actually in Marianna, Florida. A couple of things happened here. One, this was a major battle during the Civil War, but that's really not what I'm here to see. The actual subject matter of today's video is a little more dark and grim. In front of it. In fact, this corner right here, this is called Eli Corner and Dozier School for Boys. It opened in 1900, January the 1st of 1900 to be exact. For a long time, it was the largest reform school in the entire United States. For the 100 years that the reform school was open, it gained a huge reputation for abuse, beatings, torture, rapes, and even the murders of students by the staff members. Just a few short years ago, the fence was erected around it because the school was closed and it was officially announced a crime scene. Authorities discovered as many as 55 bodies on campus. So we can't get inside of the fenced-in area, but right around the corner from me, there are a few buildings. Come over to the back side of the building because the other side of the building is the school, and obviously they don't want you taking pictures of the school. This was part of the boys' home. There's a metal railing here, and you can see there's a set of stairs leading to an upstairs area.
So we are now on the north side campus. The correctional facility was right in front of me, but now it's on the left. We're on the other side of the correctional facility, which is over where the correctional facility is over there. Yeah, we're now on the north side campus. This is all the maintenance buildings they have. This is the alternative Jackson School. And we've got some abandoned buildings. These were the bunkhouses and I believe classrooms of some sort for the Dozier School for Boys North Campus. So when they were desegregated, this is where all the black boys came. Oh, is it segregated? Or is it
desegregation is when you combine everybody. Segregation is the separation of the races.
Okay, so mid-1900s is where they were segregated. This is the school that was segregated from black to white. North Campus is where all the black people were, and the South Campus is where all the white people were. The South Campus is much larger than this area, but it is all fenced off with 12-foot fences, barbed wire, basically as if you were in a prison. It closed down in 2011 after a century of allegations of abuse, murder. Who knows what the recent allegation is, but there's been some public statements by the White House Boys, which was the group of guys who actually experienced the abuse, and some of their friends have been murdered. You should definitely check it out. I believe some of their stories are corrupt. I don't know if they're just trying to get money from whoever, or I'm sure some of it is very true though. This is one of the first buildings we're coming on. This is a bunkhouse. You can actually see the bunk beds through that entryway there. Oh my god. That's
Jeez,
like, what was that?
heart.
We just had like the AC next door turn on. It was super loud. But that was the building that we haven't explored yet, but it's completely deteriorated. I mean, the roof is still on this one. The one that's over here is going to be the same exact layout as this building. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this building and I'm going to get some more photos. I really want to check out that building over there. They've had a couple recent TV broadcasts about this area, and this is the exact location where they had filmed at. And this was the area where we ran into the huge spider and bee problem. Still got some markings here. It's like a palm tree of some sort. I might have to post an article that I saw earlier. But I'm gonna take some photos real quick. Yeah, there's a butterfly on you, or it was on you. Some dead animals in here. There's lots of spider webs too.
You were in my photo, but you're not in it.
Were you in the pen?
Yeah, and you completely vanished out of the photo, but I captured you. Definitely. Like, right here. Interesting too.
so we're on the north campus of the Dozier School for Boys. I'll post an article so you guys can read up on it a little bit, but I don't want to have to repeat this. Got some signatures here from like 84, 87.
This original WSRE presentation is made.
You know, and I guess you would have had to been a person that was in war or an ambulance attendant or something like that to really hear people screaming like that. And
Well, University of South Florida scientists are about to begin an extensive exhumation in a Florida Panhandle graveyard. They discovered 50 unmarked graves at the Dozier School for Boys, a state institution for wayward children shut down in 2011 after allegations of abuse and even suspicious deaths. Several of our viewers reached.
A new discovery at the Dozier School for Boys in Mariana. Evidence of 27 previously unknown graves that may belong to former students. As Jake Stofan tells us, the governor has been made aware of the find and has offered to work with local officials going forward.
The Dozier School for Boys in Mariana, Florida has a dark 100-year history of suspected physical and sexual abuse of students. Art Kimbrough has been intimately involved in the Dozier story.
I was around both sides of, I'll call it the entire spectrum of emotions as it related to it.
The remains of more than 50 young boys who attended the school were unearthed in 2015, prompting the legislature to issue a formal apology.
We say to you, we apologize.
But new findings suggest the Dozier grounds may still contain secrets.
Wow. I think was my first comment. This is heady.
A recent ground-penetrating radar scan identified as many as 27 potential grave sites that have yet to be exhumed.
We thought that all the graves had been identified. Obviously, they haven't.
The governor's acknowledged the findings and offered support to county officials moving forward.
I don't know if we'll ever quite put this behind us, but I do know the state is in a posture to do what we need to do in order to rectify or try to clean up the situation.
It was only 3 weeks ago that the final remains from the 2015 excavation were reinterred here in this Tallahassee cemetery. This report is the first evidence supporting former students' claims that more bodies still remain on the school grounds yet to be discovered.
But Kimbrough says there's still research that needs to be conducted to confirm the suspected graves.
They're going to have to exhume them, have to anthropologically examine everything that's happened.
It's not clear what the path forward will look like. Former students of Dozier hope the discovery will result in a full excavation of the school grounds. Reporting from the state capitol, Jake Stofan, Channel 4, the local station.
The 27 suspected graves were discovered during a pollution cleanup on the Dozier property in late March. They're located less than 200 yards from an area known as Boot Hill, where 7 former students and staff members were reburied earlier this year.